Today we're going to start a survey of 1 Samuel in the Old Testament. It's one of my favourite books, if you're allowed to have favourites. What I'm planning to do is to lift one little lesson from roughly each chapter. And today that lesson comes from 1 Samuel chapter 1 and verses 26 to 28. And she said, that is Hannah, O my Lord, as thy soul liveth, my Lord, I am the woman that stood by thee here praying unto the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord hath given me my petition which I asked of him. Therefore also I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he liveth, he shall be lent to the Lord. And he worshipped the Lord there. Hannah is one of those Bible women who has a beauty that is far more than skin deep. I think that it is little wonder that her name is given by many Christian parents to their own newborn girls, perhaps in the hope that their little one will replicate the character of this Hannah. Hannah's lovely character was not produced by the sunshine of pleasant circumstances. It was developed in the crucible of adversity. There was a situation where the priests of that day, men called Hophni and Phinehas, they carried out their service for personal gain, and we read about that in chapter 2. There were also difficulties at home where her husband seems to have taken a second wife who became an adversary to her. Earlier in this chapter we read that her adversary also provoked her sore for to make her fret because the Lord had shut up her womb. We read that in verse 6. And then, in her grief, her husband said to her in verse 8, Am not I better to thee than 10 sons? Which was about the stupidest thing for a husband to say to his wife, particularly if he had taken a second wife because Hannah was barren. The loveliness of Hannah is seen in the words of verse 10. She was in bitterness of soul and prayed unto the Lord and wept sore. Her difficulties did not make her bitter towards God or even towards her family, as sometimes they can do. Her soul was so affected by the challenges around her that it drove her to God rather than away from God. Thus she prayed unto the Lord. That, of course, is why God allows difficulties in our lives in order to draw us to Himself. Now, I think that it is important to note that Hannah's prayer was not simply a prayer for her own satisfaction. Yes, she wanted a son, but not just for herself. She wanted a son for God. Verse 11 tells us, I will give him unto the Lord all the days of his life. In other words, the Lord's interests were central to her prayer. An important lesson in this story is that God answers our prayers when they are prayed according to His will. That's what the Lord meant in John chapter 14, verse 14, whenever He said, If ye ask anything in my name, I will do it. Hannah was doing that in her prayer, and therefore she could say, For this child I prayed, and the Lord hath given me my petition, which I asked of him. Verse 27. That's also the reason why she called the child Samuel, because I have asked him of the Lord, she says in verse 20. Every time she called that child, every time she mentioned his name, was an ongoing, constant reminder that our faithful God hears and answers prayer. Not always in the way we expect, not always the answers that we want, but in a way that will glorify His name and bring the greater blessing to others. Let that be the rationale for our prayers.